Hey, Matt here. I know this podcast is all about turnkey real estate investing, like having this stuff done for you. And that's great. And I'm really glad that you found us. I'm glad you're here. But if you have any interest whatsoever about potentially doing this for yourself, I'd like to invite you to the Epic Intensive. It's coming up in May. It's in Los Angeles. I think it's May 24th, 25th, 26th. Early bird pricing just opened. So in fact, it's super early bird pricing. And, make it, if it's a travel for you, make a trip out of it. Bring the family, come in, sit with us for 3 full days and learn how to do this yourself. At the very least, walk away with the greater understanding of what goes on behind the scenes to create turnkey real estate investments. And then you can decide from there whether you want to go out and, hey, I can do that, or continue to leverage somebody else's resources and expertise to have it done for you. Go to epicintensive.com. I've been talking to you for a while here. I'd love to meet you face to face. epicintensive.com.
This is Stereo Media.
You don't have a money problem, you have an idea problem. This is Turnkey Real Estate Investing, the show for busy people who want to invest in real estate but don't have the time or desire to take on the heavy lifting. And here's your cash flow savvy host, Matt Theriault.
Hello, and welcome to Turnkey Real Estate Investing. This is real estate investing for busy people just like yourself. If this is your first time here, glad you made it. Make yourself at home. If this is not your first time here, welcome back. Alrighty, came off a great weekend this last weekend. My son is in baseball, and it's just like the best day of the week for me now is on Saturday mornings to go watch him play. So, I mean, he's only 5 years old, but just to watch him stand up there and all the guts and the courage in front of the crowd screaming, it's like it's really invigorating. I'm really proud of him. But it's awesome. Hey, but that's kid talk. That's me talking about my son. And I remember when I didn't have a son, I couldn't stand it when other people talked about their kids. But I get it now. So if you have kids, I am so sorry for my past feelings towards you. And if you don't have kids, understand once you walk in in a parent's shoes, you will totally get it and you won't be able to shut up. All right. So last night I was perusing the news looking for inspiration for a new and fresh approach to talking to you about buy and hold cash flowing real estate, about turnkey real estate investing, income property. I mean, face it, it's not that exciting. I mean, there are countless shows about flipping houses. I mean, TV, podcasts, radio, magazines. I mean, there's blogs and websites and seminars, all kinds of stuff about flipping houses, but not one about holding them. If there is, it's not the primary focus. They might bring it up, they might mention it, but it's not the focus. I mean, can you imagine that TV show? It'd just be like a camera sitting in front of a house and filming it sit there. That hardly has the appeal of rummaging through a disgusting, distressed property with vermin and insects and the stench, and demoing the walls and bringing out the sledgehammer and breaking off the countertops and adding square footage and then polishing it all up and putting furniture inside and getting it ready for open house and turning what was once a turd into a diamond. Now that's compelling TV. That's flipping houses. That's exciting. Holding houses? Not so much. In fact, it's the opposite. It's very boring. But it is what creates wealth. Here's the distinction. You can get rich flipping houses, but you get wealthy holding them. I mean, imagine if you had purchased 20 cash flowing homes 20 years ago. Imagine. Now, compare that to imagine having flipped 20 homes 20 years ago. That would have been a very good year for sure, but where would you be right now? I mean, I'm speaking in a vacuum, of course, and specifically about real estate and comparing apples to apples of those two scenarios. Well, there is no comparison. Flipping might create riches. Holding creates wealth. It's the difference between focusing on piles of cash versus streams of cash. Now, I've talked to you about this concept from many different angles. In fact, some angles more than once. For example, how your primary residence is a terrible investment. I mean, you can refer back to, I think it's episode 13 of this podcast. I've discussed it a couple times on the Epic Real Estate Investing podcast, a couple times on the Do-Over podcast, and a couple times on the Epic Wealth, maybe 3 or 4 times on the Epic Wealth podcast. And I like talking about it. I talk about it over and over because I just like it because of the way it blows people's minds. The idea that your home is a terrible investment. It confronts everything that most people have been raised to believe about buying their home. I mean, when you do the math and you look at it from every angle, I mean, from a tax perspective, from an income perspective, from an appreciation perspective, from a leverage and amortization perspective, I mean, it doesn't matter how you slice it up. Your home is a terrible investment. I mean, the math is so compelling and undeniable. For years, I mean, more than a decade now, I've always wondered, why aren't more of your financial quote-unquote experts talking about this? Why aren't they sharing this with you? What aren't they telling you, and why aren't they telling it to you? Well, I mean, I scratch my head and I think about it all the time. Like, why do they still dole out the same antiquated advice to buy your home and opt for the 15-year mortgage, even if you can, and get it paid off as soon as possible? They give that advice for one reason. One reason. They believe it's the best you will be able to do. They don't believe you're capable of more. You should be insulted. I mean, if you can buy your home, you can certainly buy an investment property. The actions are exactly the same, only the focus changes. Of course you can do it. Anyway, as I was surfing for some inspiration last night, I stumbled upon this article, and it caught my attention as the message out there, this message, it's on the brink, I think, of going mainstream. Finally, here, I'll read it to you. It comes from on cnbc.com. This was March 26th, so just last week. And at the headline or the title, here's why Tony Robbins tells millennials to buy a house, not a home. It's by Catherine Dill. And I'll just kind of read through it loosely. It's a really short article. But for generations past, home ownership was a significant rite of passage that signaled stability, commitment, and often prosperity. But in this, as in so many other cases, millennials are different. As of 2015, adults under age 35 made up 19% of U.S. households, but less than 10% of homeowners, according to a report released by Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies. In fact, in 2015, homeownership for that group fell to a historic low of 31%. Entrepreneur and best-selling author Tony Robbins says that while millennials might be missing out on the social upsides of homeownership, real estate is not the best investment they could be making. One of the weakest performers is your personal real estate because it doesn't provide much income, Robbins says. I'll repeat that. One of the weakest performers is your personal real estate because it doesn't provide much income, Robbins says. It's an inflation hedge. You do a little better than inflation, and you can have your home, so there's a psychological, emotional benefit. I really wonder if Tony has been listening to me, to listening to this podcast, because I have said that almost word for word so many times. But it goes on. Instead, millennials in a position to buy property should be considering how to do so in a way that will provide them additional cash flow, he says. If you can own real estate with an income is the one form of real estate that's more valuable, says Robbins. Opinions on the imperative of millennial homeownership vary. Self-made millionaire Grant Cardone tells CNBC that homeowners are forced to continue to spend unceasingly and that he regrets buying a house at age 30. Unless you have $20 million in the bank in cash, you have no business buying a house, says Cardone. You get that? Unless you have $20 million in the bank in cash, you have no business buying a house, says Cardone. In the personal finance classic, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, author Robert Kiyosaki notes that houses should be viewed as a liability, as opposed to an asset, and points out that it's not a given that a home will appreciate in value. No, if you're investing in anything, whether it's your personal residence or an investment property, if you're banking on appreciation, that's gambling. Okay, it's not a given that it's going to appreciate. I'm not saying don't buy a house. What I'm saying is that you should understand the difference between an asset and a liability. Kiyosaki writes, when I want a bigger house, I first buy assets that will generate the cash flow to pay for the house. Right? Robbins emphasizes that real estate investing doesn't need to entail keys and a welcome mat. You can invest through a REIT, a real estate investment trust. You don't have to buy everything. You get a piece of all these things, Robbins says. But whether millennials choose to spend their nest egg on a nest or begin focusing on a portfolio instead, Robbins says the worst mistake is making no investment at all. The most important thing, I think, for millennials is to get in the game. So that's the article. So what was the headline? That kind of summed it up. It said, Tony Robbins tells millennials to buy a house, not a home. Yes, real estate is a good investment, but no one said you had to live in it for it to be a good investment. In fact, that property that you live in is probably the worst investment. It's one of the worst investments you could make. Like he said, it just barely outpaces inflation. That's it. You stand still with that. Now, there is one exception. There is one exception, however. And they didn't mention it in this article. And still very few, if any, people mention it. I don't think I've ever heard it before. There is one exception when I believe it does make sense to buy your primary residence. If you live in a market or you're going to buy a house where it's cheaper to buy on a monthly basis than it is to rent the property, then you'll get no argument from me about buying your primary residence. I mean, you have to live somewhere, right? You have to pay for a roof over your head. You have to do that. And if you can own that roof for less than it would cost to rent it, then go ahead, buy it. Other than that, though, buy investment properties for cash flow first, and then let the cash flow buy your home. Build your passive income to pay for your active liabilities. Build your passive income to pay for your active liabilities. And if you'd like to bypass the frustrations that plague most passive income seekers, go to passiveincomeaudit.com. Passiveincomeaudit.com, where you'll get to speak to a passive income expert right here in my office. And that consultation is free, by the way, on one condition. It's free to you on one condition. If at any moment you feel like working with Cash Flow Savvy isn't going to be a good fit, you let your passive income expert know, okay? And that will be the end of the conversation. No harm, no foul, no obligation whatsoever. If at any moment you feel like working with Cash Flow Savvy isn't going to be a good fit, you let your passive income expert know. And to be fair, they promise to do the same, right? Maybe it won't be a good fit. Maybe it will be. Go to passiveincomeaudit.com and you be the judge. All right, I'll see you next week on another episode of Turnkey Real Estate Investing, where cash flow is king.
Does your money work for you as hard as you do for it? If not, no worries. You do not have a money problem. You merely have an idea problem. We're cashflowsavvy.com, and we'd like to share a new idea with you around income real estate that can transform your financial future and accelerate its arrival. Go to cashflowsavvy.com and download a free investor's package. Cashflowsavvy.com. You do not have a money problem, merely an idea problem. Cashflowsavvy.com. More ideas, less worries. Cashflowsavvy.com.